All right, let's begin. This is session 10, and it is called Maximum Parenting. In spite of all the qualms we talked about last week that a lot of couples feel, especially young couples, with regards to having children, the enormous amount of money, the time and effort it takes, raising good kids in the midst of a self-absorbed culture, or maybe just the fear that what I want to do for myself is going to be radically altered. Regardless of all of those hesitations, the fact remains that parenting really is one of the great joys in life. And what greater achievement than to be able to launch a healthy, positive difference maker out into the world? What greater sense of accomplishment can a man have than to send a living message of hope into the future? But parenting is not for the faint of heart. As many of you know, it's kind of a white-knuckled thrill ride, am I right? Those of you who are further down the road than me, it's a long-term commitment that lacks any guarantee of a specific outcome. There are no guarantees. We just kind of hang on for the ride. And for some of the moments, there are these incredible highs, and then sometimes in parenting, there are these crashing lows. Well, guys, since I'm still on the front end of parenting, especially with regards to personal experience, I thought it would be helpful to tag team this session with someone who's had a whole lot more experience than me. In fact, one of the reasons this curriculum that we use in the Quest is so useful is because it is written not with cliches and quick fixes. Robert Lewis has invested years into research, and he has tremendous insights into the Scriptures and a wealth of personal experiences with 4 children. And here's his perspective on some of the highs and some of the lows of parenting.
There's some thrilling highs, and then there's some crashing lows. I remember how excited my wife and I were when my daughter set a regional record in the backstroke for her AAU swim team. And then she got invited to swim in the All-American meet in Austin, Texas. She was just 13 and she was setting records nationally. And for a brief moment as a dad, I had visions of Olympic glory dancing in my head. But right after the All-American meet in Austin, Texas, my wife stopped at a little convenience store one day after practice to pick up a drink for my daughter, Elizabeth. And she went inside, got the drink, came out, and opened the door of the car. And when she opened the door of the car, there was my daughter having the first of many epileptic seizures that she would encounter for the rest of her life. And then that led to a series of medications that didn't work, and that ended her swim career. And then for the next 10 years, we battled with epilepsy. Great high one moment, crashing low the next. I can remember being in the emergency room one night at Baptist Hospital, and the doctor walking out of the emergency room and telling me that they were going to have to amputate the ends of some of my son's toes, and that he'd probably have difficulty walking the rest of his life. My first thought as a dad, knowing how much he loved sports, was he'd never play again. I was absolutely crushed that evening at Baptist Hospital. And then 6 years later, sitting in Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, it's the second overtime against Alabama, and seeing that same son run onto the field with the special teams and snap the winning field goal to beat the Crimson Tide. Boy, it just doesn't get any better than that. Incredible highs and crashing lows. Listen, guys, parenting is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, parenting really is a roller coaster thrill ride. It's a long-term commitment. It requires nail-biting faith and never-ending hope and unconditional love all along the way. The Bible is very realistic about parenting, and the Scriptures paint a clear picture of all those highs and all those lows. I want you to look on your outline, and let me give you a snapshot, all right? In Genesis chapter 4, right at the very beginning of the human race, it says this: Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I've begotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And again she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, those were 2 tremendous highs. And then a few verses, there was a crashing low. It says, it came about when they were young men out and in the field that Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. In Psalm 127:3 it says, the fruit of the womb is a reward. And then yet in Genesis 27 we read, Rebekah said to her husband Isaac, I'm tired of living. If our son Jacob marries a pagan woman, what good will my life be to me? In Proverbs 10:1 it says, a wise son makes a father glad. And that's true, isn't it? Yet in 2 Samuel 18 it says, when David learned about the death of his foolish son Absalom, he cried, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you? Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Now, guys, can you feel the heartache in those words? How about Proverbs chapter 17, verse 6? An incredible high. The glory of sons is their fathers. Yet in 1 Samuel chapter 2 it says, Eli the priest heard all that his sons were doing and how they lay with women, and he said to them, why do you do such evil things? But they would not listen to the voice of their father. And look at this last line, and the Lord desired to put them to death. Now that's a crashing low. Proverbs 29:3 says, a son who loves wisdom makes his father glad. But then Proverbs 17:25 says, a foolish son is grief to his father and bitterness to his mother who bore him. Psalm 127:3 says, children are a gift of the Lord. But then look at Judges 11:35. It says, Jephthah's daughter was his only child. And it came about when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you are among those who trouble me. Matthew 3:17 says, and after Jesus was baptized, behold, the heavens opened, and God said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. But look at the flip side of that with this father. Luke 15 says, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger one said, Father, give me my share of the estate. And that son went away, and he squandered his estate with harlots and loose living. But that wasn't the end of the story, was it? It wasn't long after that, that very son came running back to his dad, and his dad embraced him and threw a party and said, this son that was lost is now found. A tremendous high out of that terrible low. Now, that is the thrill ride of parenting. All those A's and then all those F's. The intense pride and the gut-wrenching pain. The excellence and then the embarrassment. The triumphs and the tragedies. The reward and the rebellion. They're all mixed together. Parenting is not for the faint of heart. So, what do you hold on to? What do you grab hold to? Today, as we finish up the last sessions of a man in his home, you know, we've been looking in this mirror of home and looking at the reflection that shines back. How am I doing as a husband? How am I doing as a father? As we finish up this session called Maximum Parenting, I want to give you 4 handlebars that you can grip tightly all the way through this ride with children. 4 handlebars for maximum parenting. So when you look into this mirror of home, the reflection that you see coming back will be one of confidence and one of success. So look on your outline. Here we go. First of all, hold on to the goal. What is the goal of parenting? The Bible actually opens with it, okay? In Genesis 1:28, at the beginning of humanity, it says, God blessed the man and his wife and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over it. Now, the goal of parenting is nestled in that verse. And here's a clue, guys. It's not just having kids, okay? It's not just populate the planet. The verse says the goal of parenting is having kids who can subdue and rule the earth in a way that God desires. That's the key. He wanted the man and the woman to create a home that would serve as this healthy incubator that would allow them to release them into the world as difference makers, godly difference makers who could exercise a certain level of righteous leadership over that little bit of turf on planet Earth that they would go and possess. That is the goal of parenting. Now, thousands of years later, the Apostle John said these words with great passion. He said, I have no greater joy than this, to hear of my children walking in the truth. Now, why would that be the greatest joy? Well, he's talking about the release of difference makers Now, I believe John's talking about his spiritual children, okay? Not actually biological children, but I also believe it can be applied to fathers who will see their sons and daughters exercising this righteous leadership and making a difference the way God intended when he put a man and a woman together and told them to multiply and be intentional about parenting. You know, a dad will dream about all kinds of things for his children, things that he believes will bring him great joy. Dreams that they'll be the smartest or the best looking or the star athlete or the most popular, the brightest, the best, the one who gets the most attention. But here's what you need to know. The truth is, they can be all those things and more. But if in the end they miss walking in the truth and knowing God, whatever joy you have will fall miserably short of what it could have been. You need to hold on to the goal, and you need to hold on to the right goal. That's why from the time our children are born, we should be doing two things. In little ways, by the quality of our lives and the wealth of our words, we should be doing these two things. Regardless of how good or bad they are at any time, or how compliant they are or rebellious, we need to be, first of all, pointing our children to God, and secondly, praying fervently and continuously that they'll go there. Hold on to that goal. Now, as your children grow older, especially in the midlife, you know what? It's not going to matter much anymore what they look like. You really won't care about that. It won't matter as much to you that they won a trophy in t-ball or soccer or they made straight A's in junior high school. As they move out into life, those things won't hold the same luster as they once did, because life will have settled down into what really counts. And what really counts are things like values and faithful love and standards and honorable name. And you see them making contributions in the world. One of the greatest indicators that those things will occur in our children is when one day they walk up to you. Guys dream of this day. When they walk up to you and there's no prompting on your part, and they look at you and say, "Dad, let me tell you what God's doing in my life." That's a clue that they're moving toward the goal. There was a mom and dad who had been consistently doing all of these things we're talking about and holding on to their goal. Their daughter moved to Europe to work for a consulting firm. While she was in Europe, she fell for a bright, successful, young New Zealander. There's one problem, though. He had no faith in God. Now, this mom and dad had raised their daughter to understand the Scriptures. But now there's this real person. He's very nice, very successful, and she's got these intense feelings for him. But if you know anything about the Scriptures, it says you're not to marry someone who has no faith. Did you guys know that? Not to marry someone who's not following the same God you are. So she had God over here and these unbelievable feelings over here, and her parents were thousands of miles away. All they could do was point her to God and pray that she would go there. You know what happened? In the midst of that gut-wrenching time for her, she made a very heroic decision. She quit her job. She packed her bags. She flew back to America. It was an agonizing step of real faith. And even before God rewarded her later with the man of her dreams, which he did, her mom and her dad had already experienced their greatest joy. God had become first for her. She was walking in the truth. That's the goal. Now, gentlemen, I know a lot of men and women who mean well, who call themselves Christians, and in fact they are, but they really don't have this goal of their children walking in the truth. They just want them to have a nice job and a nice home and marry somebody nice, but they don't have the goal of their children walking in the truth. A second thing I want you to hold on to, some more handlebars. Hold on to your time. Hold on to your time. Nothing gets away from a dad faster than his time. In a national study on the family, guess what the number one complaint of teenagers was? Now, this may be surprising. Number one complaint of teenagers: my parents don't spend enough time with me. That's interesting to me. We know from surveys that 40% of all kids in America today, they don't feel a close relationship with their dad. Here's what Ephesians 5 says. It says, therefore be careful how you live, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time because these days are evil. Now, the days are evil, I believe, because one reason, they're just so fast. Now, here's the thing. We all have the same amount of time, right? Nobody has 26 hours in the day. We all have the same amount of time. The difference will be that some dads will make the most of that and some dads won't. The difference will be what you are holding on to. Some dads will have a firm grip on their time. Some dads will just gripe about the time. There are two management styles. The first one is the reactive style. The reactive style. It's the one that kind of lives by the tyranny of the urgent, by the things that are sometimes really not that important. Problem is, they always seem important. They seem important because you haven't thought in advance about what really is important to you and your kids. So new things come rushing into your life, but you have nothing to measure their value against. You haven't thought in advance, what are the things that must happen in my home and with my kids? You need a filter to help you say, I can choose that, or I need to say no to that. And if you don't have that filter, gentlemen, everything will just fill the schedule. It will just flood into your schedule because there's no time to think about where you're going. And that blur of busyness and reaction and activity just sweeps away the days. And the best things in life for a dad and his children are lost in the wake of it. The second management style, time management style, is the proactive time management style. Now, it refuses to leave the best things in life to chance. You're proactive. It takes the time to decide in advance what those best things are. And then it calendars those things into the schedule. Sometimes months, sometimes even a year in advance. And then it protects those things at all costs. You do it by maybe getting away with your wife and merging calendars and discussing what experiences you want your children to have in the coming year. My wife and I have already put on the calendar the week after Christmas, we're going to get together for a full day, and that's what we're going to do for 2009. What do we want our little girl to experience? How are we going to put these things on the calendar and protect those at all costs? And it may just be one very important thing for her, but then some other meaningful things, but we want to be proactive in that. You merge school calendars and work calendars and church calendars. There are also some bigger things, the strategic fathering game plan I gave you last session. Guys, that's not a little thing. That's a big thing. It's a huge thing, and you can use it to help you hold on to your time because it will allow you, if you're proactive, to plan years in advance, just a few key moments with your son or your daughter that you don't want to miss. I want to give you a brief review and show you how that works. I want us to focus just on year 13. You know, in last session, you see the whole chart from 1 year old all the way to 21. Just year 13, let's look at that, okay? On your chart, you can see those key things that your son or your daughter needs to see and hear and receive from you and what they need to experience. We talked about how seeing dad loving mom is something they need every year from 1 to 21. And so you just do a checkup each year. You know, how am I doing with my wife? But in year 13, they're becoming a teenager. And that's when they really start noticing your character. So you take note of that. They need to see your heart. If you have a son, maybe this particular year, maybe you're proactive, you plan a special getaway where you just sit down with him and tell him what it was like growing up with your dad. The good, the bad. Maybe you tell him where your dad hurt you or how your dad made a huge difference. You let your son experience your world growing up, and you let him hear your feelings. Plan some moments like that to let him see your heart. You see on your chart that he needs to hear I love you, but especially at year 13, you see it beginning this year, he needs to hear two other things. What are they? I'm proud of you, and you're good at something, all right? And we talked about how starting at year 13, you're moving away from being a coach from those preteen years now to a cheerleader in your parenting style. So you plan for that, especially now. Your children need to receive affirming encouragement. They need to be built up. And it's on your game plan, so it shouldn't take you by surprise. For year 13, you plan moments to deliver practical life instruction about dating, about responsibility. Maybe in that year, maybe in December of that year before they turn 13, you say, you know what, I'm going to help them start a little business just to teach them some responsibility. They need Jesus in their life. Maybe for the first time, you put it on the calendar. You plan to sit down with them and explain to them how you know God, and you let them ask you questions. They need to experience some special one-on-one times with you. And this year on your chart, it's got a star and a dot. That means it's a unique opportunity and a great place to build a memory. Maybe this year you plan a hunting trip for the first time. Maybe you come up with 2 tickets to an NCAA basketball tournament. You go away, just you and him, for a great experience. Year 13 signals the need for manhood and womanhood ceremonies. Don't you think it'd be a good idea to schedule these in advance? You have to be proactive. In our game plan, the first of 4 ceremonies starts at age 13. And this can be just a simple little ceremony where you take your son out, you just explain the definition of manhood. You say you're going to live that way and you want him to hold you accountable, and you're going to do the same for him. Now, guys, listen up. These are the things a dad has to plan in advance. You're proactive. You're not just reactive. And if you don't be proactive, the times are so fast, it's just going to sweep away all these opportunities. You have to calendar it in, plan it, and then implement the plan. For maximum parenting, you must hold on to your time. A third thing you need to hold on to is this. Hold on to your responsibility. Hold on to your responsibility. Psalm 78:72 says this, "So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them with skillful hands." Now look at that verse, okay? There are 2 responsibilities embedded in there for a dad who becomes the shepherd of his home. And by the way, that's what we are, okay? We are the shepherd of our home. The first responsibility is that we must live with integrity. Live with integrity. Now, you've heard this before, but I'm going to say it again, okay? Kids need a hero. They need a hero. When they come into the world, you are their hero. I'm their hero. Not in a perfect sense, but in a very real sense, we are their hero. Now, here's the thing, okay? Do you know what's on the back end of a life lived with integrity? There aren't any guarantees, but when a dad's words and his actions are consistently in sync, the payoff can be huge with his children. That's what Robert Lewis discovered on his daughter's wedding day.
In fact, one of the greatest moments of my life, and I may get a little emotional even reading this, but one of the greatest moments of my life was on my daughter's wedding day. It was a great event, but that morning before the wedding, my wife and I got up early to go down and have breakfast, and the last person we expected to see was our daughter, the one who was getting married, Elizabeth, waiting for us early in the morning with breakfast already prepared. And she said, "Come down, I want to share breakfast with you, and I got something to say to you." And we were caught totally by surprise. But we came down and had breakfast, and she said, "I want to read something to you. I want to share it with you because this means a lot to me. And on this day, I want you to be honored first." And she pulled out this. Now, I'm not going to read it all to you because it would take too long, but I'm going to read you just a small part as it relates to me. She said this, "Dear Mom and Dad, I am overwhelmed by the enormous task of recapping and thanking you all for what you've taught, modeled, and sacrificed for me over the past 27 years. The blessings you've poured out over the decades have been unbelievable, and I'm only now realizing the magnitude of all you were to me. I am here today, this day, happier than I've ever been, marrying the most wonderful man because of you. Your prayers, your gentle push to trusting and following the Lord, your sacrifice, your quiet guidance on consequences, good and bad, for the direction my life would take because of decisions I was up against." Then she turned to me and said this, "Dad, I know what a real man is because of you. A man after God's own heart, a leader, a provider, a lover to your wife and father to your children. I knew what kind of man I wanted to marry because of you. You and I are kindred spirits. and I don't know what I would have done without our long talks. Thank you for taking me to swim practice at 4:30 in the morning. Thank you for walking with me on the Great Wall of China when I was 11 years old and giving me a love for travel. Thank you for always encouraging me to dream big, for hosting the best birthday parties ever, for always making me feel special, for letting Katie and me go backpacking in Europe when we were only 18, for encouraging me to go to graduate school, for being proud of me and telling me you were, for letting me make mistakes, for never missing a swim meet or basketball or volleyball game, for showing me what a good marriage is supposed to look like, for bringing us back presents when you went out to speak out of town, for making a big deal out of little accomplishments, for teaching me about being good with money, for giving me Mom's Camry just because, for taking us to Colorado in the summer, for spending time with me on dates or shopping trips, even with 3 kids in the family, the best Christmases every year, praising me in front of your friends, teaching me the value of hard work, praying for me, teaching me that details count, taking us out to eat, to party when we experience little accomplishments and victories, reading us the Chronicles of Narnia, being on my side when life and people seem to be against me. All those 2- and 3-line emails pointing me to trusting God and always loving me no matter what. On this day, I am so honored to be known as Robert Lewis's daughter. Now, guys, I cried my eyes out. Because let me tell you, as far as integrity is concerned, it was worth it. It was worth it.
Guys, that's what I want. And that's what I want for every man here. By the way, you remember the story about the girl who went to Europe, got the job, fell in love with a New Zealander? That was his daughter. She made the hard choice, came home. God honored that choice, married the man of her dreams. It just doesn't happen. You have to be very intentional. But I was impressed by some of the simple things. All those 1- and 2-line emails that you sent. Just a 1- or 2-line email can make all the difference in the world. He shepherded them. He shepherded them with the integrity of his heart. Secondly, we must constantly upgrade our parenting skills. We must constantly be upgrading our parenting skills. Guys, again, I'm way on the front end of all this, so I am reading all I can, listening to people as much as I can who are much further down the road than me. I just can't consume enough of this because I realize that I've got to be constantly upgrading my skills. Psalm 78:72 says, He guided them with skillful hands. We have skill when we have a long-term plan to raise a son or a daughter. We have skill when we can define manhood and womanhood to our children. We have skill when we know how to change our parenting style over the seasons of a child's life, from coaching to cheerleader to consultant. We have skill when we've taken the time to discover what their personality is, and then we adjust to it accordingly. We've talked about all those things in here. We have skill when we know and accept their bent as coming from God, and then we encourage them in that direction. We have skill when we appreciate how birth order affects a child. You guys figured this out? A lot of you have 3 kids, you figured this out. Firstborns tend to be achievers. Maybe even perfectionists for part of their life. They have high expectations of themselves and others. They're cautious and conscientious. They usually tend to be reliable, and they're fearful of new situations. All firstborns have tendencies in those directions. Middleborns are different. Middleborns, especially if they're of the same sex as the firstborn, they're going to look for ways to define themselves against the firstborn. They'll go in a different direction. Middleborns are likely to be very sociable. They tend to be very competitive and aggressive. and independent. Your middleborn can even be rebellious, like the prodigal son. Lastborns are the ones who can get away with murder. How many of you are lastborns? Yeah. They tend to be the type that's more the life of the party. They're very outgoing. They love fun. Lastborns tend to be demanding and manipulative. They tend to draw others in to help them accomplish things because that's how they grew up, drawing all their siblings in to help them get stuff done. Now, a dad who has skill understands things like personality and birth order and how it impacts his children. We have skill when we learn to dream with our kids. One child expert says it this way. He says, a child should be helped by the parent to dream a great dream for his or her life. Not in the sense of being famous, but in the sense of making a great contribution. There's that transcendent cause that we are called to teach our children. Not any dream will do. It has to be a dream that goes along with their bent. And when you discover their bent, you help them to dream big about what they can do in that area that seems to interest them the most. A dad who upgrades his parenting skills is a responsible dad, so hold on to your responsibility. Last, write this down. Hold on to your mate. Hold on to your mate. For maximum parenting, you have to hold on to your mate. Colossians 3:19 says, husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them. Look at that last verse for a moment, okay? It says, do not be embittered. That implies that there can be little things that get into the relationship, and over time, they can build an irritation that ultimately will turn into bitterness that breeds isolation. Family experts tell us that two of the toughest times in marriage, mark this down, when the marriage really suffers and is under the most stress, is when the husband and wife have preschool kids, and then later when they have teenage kids. In those two critical periods of time, children are demanding so much from you, and time gets squeezed so tight, so it's easy for the husband to feel undercared for. He begins to be resentful, and the resentfulness builds to bitterness, and the wife feels overworked and undersupported. And she starts withdrawing, and before long, you're doing a lot of things, for the kids, but really nothing for each other. And a wall can form. And guys, when the kids are gone, that wall's hard to overcome. That's why you need to hold on to your mate. And from time to time, all through your marriage, you need to be getting away with your wife, especially in those preschool years and teenage years. You need time away from the kids, not time with the kids all the time. It's not going to hurt them, and it's really going to help you. Neil Warren, in his book, Triumph of Marriage, offers some incredible insight. He interviewed 100 highly successful couples, and he looked for some common traits. Here's what he says. Look on the screen. He says, show me a man and a woman who have children, and I will show you a man and woman who need more than ever to nurture their relationship, to ensure that it thrives and grows. There's something about romance that is intensely personal. It all gets started when two people look at each other and feel something powerful happening inside themselves. They sit down with each other and they begin to share their thoughts and feelings. They talk about their dreams, their goals, their values, their beliefs, their hopes and their fears. There are few, if any, happily married persons that I've interviewed who can get what they need from one another without engaging in this very personal but direct process on a what? Regular basis. Sometimes men who spend tremendous energy in their careers want their wives to feel their love on the basis of how hard I am working for both of us. But it doesn't work like this. And sometimes women who give passionately to their children want their husbands to see how much I obviously love you because of how much I'm giving to the kids. It doesn't work this way either. Romance requires personal, direct, face-to-face time. There is never a time when two people can keep their love growing and prospering without plenty of energy spent relating to each other individually and intimately. This is why I encourage people who have children to schedule time for romance. Work it in at least once a week. Now, guys, look at the screen. There is a lot of wisdom in that. A lot of wisdom in that. There are a lot of young couples who have young children and they feel insecure about leaving their kids. They're thinking, is it okay? Will it hurt them if we're gone for 3 or 4 or 5 days? Absolutely not. In fact, if anything is going to hurt them, listen, it's going to be you hovering over them all the time. They need you to get away from them, and they need you to help them build up their EQ, their emotional quotient. A Harvard researcher wrote a best-selling book about EQ being the greatest predictor of a child's success, way more than IQ. His or her emotional stability is way more important than intellectual ability. But you know where they get that emotional stability? They get it from seeing mom and dad loving each other. It's obvious to those who work with children on a daily basis, those in preschools and daycares and churches, that the happiest, best adjusted children that they see are those whose parents have strong marriages. It's the marriage that builds the child. The greatest gift you can give your children, write this down, is to love their mother. The greatest gift you can give your children is to love their mother. Just keep stoking the fires of romance and taking the time to do so. Go to Cabo or St. Bart's or just sunny Florida for 4 or 5 days. Just you and your wife. And then on the beach with the water's kind of lapping at your feet, guys, I want you to look lovingly at your wife and say these words. Honey, this is so good for the kids. Hold on to your mate. Now, guys, we're about done with winning at home, okay? We've been talking about parenting. It begins with these words, it's a boy or it's a girl, and then very quickly, they consume all your time. They consume your heart. They consume your life and your prayers. They're going to be sleepless nights and fevers and diapers and story times. There will be lost teeth and swimming lessons and t-ball and braces and birthdays and occasionally some spiritual discussions. There will be broken bones and campouts and fishing trips, wrestling matches, school plays, driver's lessons, science projects, vacations, proms, Friday night heroics, dates, and confrontations. Then all of a sudden, graduation. And before you can imagine it, the lights are off in their room, and they're walking down the stairs and packing their car to go off to college, and just like that, they're gone. And the question is, with what? Hopefully, pointed to God. Hopefully, with great memories that are dancing in their head of time spent with you. Hopefully, with big dreams to pursue. Hopefully, with an image of what it means to live with a man or a woman for a lifetime. A picture that they hold in their heart because of you. That's maximum parenting. I want to close this session with a story about a son who is disabled and a dad who is a true hero. The umbilical cord wrapped around the boy's neck during birth, leaving him brain damaged and unable to control his limbs. You know, the doctors told his parents he's going to be a vegetable for the rest of his life. When he was 9 months old, they recommended putting him in an institution. But his parents noticed the way their son's eyes would just follow them around the room. So when he was 11, they took him to the engineering department at Tufts University and asked if there was anything that they could do to help him communicate. And they just said, hey, we don't believe there's anything going on in his brain. His dad said, really? Tell him a joke. And so they did, and he laughed. Turns out there was a whole lot going on in his brain. And so they rigged him up with a computer that allowed him to control the cursor by touching a switch with the side of his head. And Rick was finally able to communicate. You know what his first words were? Go Bruins. And after a high school classmate was paralyzed in an accident, and the school organized a charity run for him, he pecked out, "Dad, I want to do that." At the time, his dad was a self-described porker. And he thought, man, how am I going to push my son 5 miles? Still, he tried. And then he said, you know what? It was me that was handicapped. He said, I was sore for 2 weeks. But that day changed his son's life. He typed, "Dad, when we were running, it felt like I wasn't disabled anymore." And that sentence changed his dad's life. He became obsessed with giving his son that feeling as often as he could. Started with the Boston Marathon. They entered it illegally. They wouldn't let him enter it officially until later when he actually qualified with the time. Then their first triathlon. By the way, his dad had never learned to swim and hadn't ridden a bike since he was 6. So how was he going to haul his 110-pound kid through a triathlon? Dick Hoyt and his son Rick have now done over 200 triathlons, including several grueling 15-hour Ironman competitions in Hawaii. Their best time in the Boston marathons they've run is only 30 minutes off the world record. The thing I'd like the most, Rick types, is for my dad to sit in the chair and let me push him once. I think it would be fitting to close this semester where we've been talking about winning at home in this final session called Maximum Parenting with a look at Dick Hoyt and his son, Rick.
Who taught the sun where to stand in the morning? And who told the ocean you can only come this far? And who showed the moon where to hide till evening? Whose words alone can catch a falling star? Well, I know my Redeemer lives. I know my Redeemer lives. All of creation testifies this life within me cries. I know my Redeemer lives. Yeah, the very same God that spins things in orbit runs to the weary, the worn, and the weak, and the